The courtroom was silent, too silent. All eyes were locked on an 8-year-old girl gripping a worn-out stuffed bunny. Then, with a voice steadier than anyone expected, she spoke. My dad didn't do it, but I know who did. Gasps filled the room. The judge froze, the prosecutor nearly dropped his pen, and just like that the trial took a turn no one saw coming. But Olivia had no idea that speaking the truth would put her family in even greater danger because someone was watching, and they were willing to do anything to keep her silent. Where are you watching from? Write it down in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started. At the center of it all, perched on the witness stand, sat Olivia Carter. Just 8 years old, her tiny hands clutching a worn-out stuffed bunny, the one thing that had stayed by her side through everything. Her legs dangled from the chair, not quite reaching the floor, but her presence, unshakable. She looked straight ahead, her voice calm but deliberate. My dad didn't do it, but I know who did. A ripple of gasps shot through the room, a wave of shock crashing against the tension that already hung thick in the air. The judge, who had leaned back moments ago with a look of mild disinterest, suddenly sat forward. The prosecutor, mid-page flip, froze, his fingers tightening around his notes as if they might slip away. From the gallery, Olivia's mother covered her mouth, her whole body trembling. Tears streamed down her face, the weight of those words heavier than anything spoken in this courtroom before. And then, at the defense table, her father. The man who had spent months behind bars, his face shadowed with exhaustion, finally looked up. For the first time in a long time. Hope flickered in his eyes. Then, "Objection, Your Honor." The prosecutor shot up from his seat, voice edged with panic. The judge's gavel slammed down, hard and unforgiving. Order in the court. But the tension had already taken over. Every breath was held captive by what Olivia might say next. And in that moment, it wasn't the judge, the lawyers, or even the evidence that held the power. It was her. The Carter household was a place of warmth, filled with laughter that echoed through its walls. Every evening, Daniel Carter would scoop his daughter Olivia into his arms, spinning her around in the park as she giggled uncontrollably. He was more than just her father. He was her hero, the one who made bedtime stories come alive, who never missed a chance to chase fireflies with her on summer nights. Her mother, Jessica Carter, worked long hours at the hospital, but no matter how exhausted she was, she always came home with a smile, filling the kitchen with the smell of fresh cookies. Their little world wasn't grand, but it was perfect. Until the night, it all fell apart. Flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of Olivia's bedroom. The distant hum of sirens grew louder until they stopped. Right outside their house. A loud pounding on the door shattered the silence. Olivia barely had time to peek from behind the staircase before she saw her father being dragged away in handcuffs. "Daddy!" she screamed, rushing toward him, but Jessica pulled her back. "What's happening?" Olivia sobbed, clinging to her mother's side. Daniel turned, his face filled with confusion and fear. "I didn't do anything. Jessica, tell them I didn't do anything." But the officers didn't listen. The accusation? Assault and attempted murder? The victim? Their next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson. The case against Daniel looked damning. His fingerprints were on the back door handle. His wallet was found near the crime scene, and witnesses claimed they saw him running from the house that night. It didn't matter that he swore he was innocent. It didn't matter that Olivia knew her dad would never hurt anyone. The world around them had already decided. Neighbors who once greeted them with friendly smiles now whispered behind their backs. Jessica noticed the stares when she walked down the grocery aisle. The cashier who used to ask about Olivia now barely made eye contact, and Olivia? She felt it the most. At school, her classmates avoided her. The seat next to her in class, Always empty. Some kids whispered when she walked by. She's the criminal's daughter. Everything she knew, everything she loved, had been ripped away, and for the first time in her life, Olivia Carter felt completely alone. The world had grown colder since her father's arrest. Olivia could feel it in the way people looked at her, in the hushed voices that followed her everywhere. But more than anything, she could feel it in her mother's exhaustion, the way Jessica Carter came home late, barely able to hold herself together, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. And so, Olivia stopped asking questions, until the night she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. She had been playing outside, tracing lines in the dirt with a stick, her stuffed bunny beside her, when she heard voices near the neighbor's fence. 2 police officers stood just a few feet away, talking in low tones. She froze. "Something about this case doesn't sit right," one officer muttered. The other shrugged. "Yeah, but we have enough to convict him." The words sent a chill through Olivia. She stayed perfectly still, her breath caught in her throat, her little fingers gripping her bunny so tight it nearly flattened in her grasp. Something wasn't right. They knew it. And yet, they weren't doing anything about it. Her heart pounded as she ran inside, bursting through the door. "Mom!" she cried, but Jessica was hunched over a pile of bills, rubbing her temples. "Not now, sweetheart. I can't deal with this right now." Olivia's chest tightened. No one was listening. Not the police, not her mother, not the lawyers who only ever said, "We'll do our best." That night, Olivia lay awake, clutching her bunny to her chest, staring at the ceiling. If no one else was going to prove her dad was innocent, then she would. Olivia Carter was just 8 years old, but she had already learned a hard truth. Sometimes, the world didn't care about what was right. If the police weren't going to look for the truth, she would find it herself. She started listening. At night, when her mother thought she was asleep, she crept down the hall, pressing her ear against the door as Jessica spoke in hushed whispers on the phone. "They're saying the evidence is solid." "I don't know what else to do," her mother murmured. And every time Olivia heard something important, a name, a date, a detail, she wrote it down in her diary. She started paying attention to everything. At school, when adults spoke near her, she sat quietly, pretending to color, while her ears picked up every word. And then came the biggest risk of all. The day she sneaked into her dad's lawyer's office. She had been waiting outside while Mr. Daniels, her father's attorney, spoke with her mother. His office door was slightly open, and inside, a stack of case files. Her heart pounded as she peeked inside. And that's when she saw it. A name. Mr. Wallace. The same neighbor her father had been accused of attacking, Mr. Henderson, had an argument with Mr. Wallace just days before the crime. She stared at the file, her mind racing. Why wasn't anyone talking about this? But no one was listening to an 8-year-old girl. Until one night, as she sat curled up on the couch, flipping through TV channels, she stumbled upon a courtroom drama. A young girl took the witness stand, her voice shaking but strong. And then the lawyer on screen said something that made Olivia sit up straight. Even the smallest voices can speak the loudest. She clutched her bunny, her heart racing. If that girl could do it, so could she. She wasn't just going to find the truth, she was going to tell it. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, jurors, and a sea of eyes, all locked on one thing. Her. 8-year-old Olivia Carter sat on the witness stand, her small hands wrapped tightly around her stuffed bunny. She wasn't supposed to be here. No one had expected this. She had fought for it. And now, there was no turning back. The defense attorney took a step forward, his voice gentle but steady. "Olivia, can you tell us what you saw?" She took a deep breath, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. Her fingers tightened around the bunny's ear. And then, she spoke. I saw Mr. Wallace near Mr. Henderson's house before the crime, and I heard him say, 'You'll regret messing with me.'" The reaction was instant. Gasps shot through the room like wildfire. Jurors exchanged startled glances. Even the judge, who had seemed unimpressed until now, leaned forward in his chair. At the defense table, Daniel Carter, her father, stared at her in shock. And across the room, Mr. Wallace stiffened. The prosecutor was on his feet before she could even take her next breath. "Objection!" he snapped. "She's just a child. This is speculation." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order in the court!" The murmurs died instantly. The judge turned his piercing gaze toward the prosecutor. His voice was sharp, final. "I will decide what's credible in this courtroom." Olivia swallowed hard. She wasn't done yet. Slowly, she reached into her lap, pulling out her worn-out diary. "I wrote everything down," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry across the silent room. The defense attorney took the diary carefully, flipping through its pages, dates, notes, details. Proof that she had been listening, watching, putting together the truth long before anyone else. The judge extended his hand. "Let me see it." The moment the diary was passed forward, the tension in the room shifted. This wasn't just the words of a little girl anymore. This was evidence. The judge turned to the attorneys. "The court will recess while this new information is reviewed." His gavel came down again, but the room was already in chaos. Whispers, shock, questions. But Olivia didn't hear any of it. She was looking at Mr. Wallace, and for the first time, he looked scared. The courtroom had barely settled when the shocking truth unraveled like a thread pulled too far. During the recess, investigators worked fast, and what they found changed everything. When court resumed, the defense attorney wasted no time stepping forward, holding a new report in his hands. "Your Honor, investigators examined the security camera outside Mr. Henderson's home." A pause. It wasn't just broken. The courtroom tensed. It was tampered with. A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. The judge narrowed his eyes. "And the person whose fingerprints were found on that camera?" The attorney turned, his eyes locking onto one man. "Mr. Wallace." A loud gasp. All heads turned. Mr. Wallace, seated near the back, had gone pale. His fingers twitched on the edge of the table. "Then," he snapped. "This is ridiculous," he stammered, shooting up from his seat. "I never touched that camera." The defense attorney stepped closer, flipping open Olivia's diary. "Then how do you explain this?" He turned a page. "On the night of the crime, Olivia saw you near the victim's house, and the next morning—" He held up another page. "She overheard you say, 'You'll regret messing with me.'" A hush fell over the room. Wallace's mouth opened, closed. His lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was too damning. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Wallace, do you deny that your fingerprints were found on the tampered security camera?" Silence. Then, slowly, Mr. Wallace sank back into his chair. His hands trembled. His jaw tightened. He had nowhere left to run. But just as relief started to wash over Olivia, something even worse happened. As police searched Wallace's house, they found something chilling. Evidence that he wasn't working alone. A second suspect. Someone who had been in on it from the start. Before anyone could make sense of it, chaos struck again. That night, as Olivia and her mother tried to process everything, their home was broken into, glass shattered, footsteps pounded against the wooden floors. Jessica grabbed Olivia, pulling her into a corner as officers stationed outside stormed in. But whoever it was, they were already gone. And Olivia knew. The truth was out. And now someone wanted to silence it. The house felt different now. Every shadow seemed darker. Every sound outside felt like a threat. That night, as Jessica Carter tucked Olivia into bed, she tried to smile, tried to act normal, but Olivia could feel it. The fear. And when the phone rang just past midnight, that fear became real. Jessica hesitated before answering, her fingers trembling as she lifted the receiver. "Hello?" For a moment, nothing. Just silence. Then, a voice, low, raspy. "You should stop asking questions." Jessica's breath hitched. "Who is this?" But the line went dead. The air was suffocatingly still. Jessica's hands shook as she slammed the phone down. Olivia, standing in the hallway clutching her bunny, had heard everything. Her mother turned, eyes wide with panic, pulling Olivia into her arms. The next morning, police officers swarmed their home. Patrol cars stationed outside, officers checking locks, windows, exits. The case wasn't just about her father's innocence anymore. It was about who was trying to bury the truth. Then, another breakthrough. The police had been searching for someone else, someone they believed had been part of this crime from the beginning. Frank Mitchell, a former employee of Mr. Henderson. A man who had reasons to want him dead. A man who had disappeared the very night Daniel Carter was arrested. And just when the police thought they had found him, he was gone. His apartment, empty. His car, abandoned. No credit card use, no phone activity. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had called them that night wasn't done yet. The night was still. Too still. Jessica Carter had barely slept in days, her ears tuned to every creak, every distant sound. Olivia lay awake, hugging her bunny, her heart refusing to slow. And then, crash! The sound of shattering glass. Jessica bolted upright. Olivia froze. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house, and then, shouting. The officers stationed outside burst through the front door, guns drawn. In the chaos, Olivia caught a glimpse, a man in a hoodie, lunging toward the back door. But he didn't make it. The police tackled him to the ground. His hood fell back, revealing a face Olivia had only seen in old newspaper clippings and police reports. Frank Mitchell, the missing man, the accomplice. He struggled, fighting like a cornered animal, but the officers pinned him down, slapping handcuffs, and then, through gritted teeth, he turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto Olivia. "This isn't over." His voice sent a chill down her spine, but Olivia knew. It was almost over. The next morning, the police brought in another suspect, Robert Langley. A name Olivia had seen in her diary, a name tied to Wallace. Langley wasn't as bold as Mitchell. He didn't fight, didn't struggle. Instead, as soon as he sat in the interrogation room, he folded. Wallace was the mastermind, he admitted, his voice shaking. He was embezzling money from Henderson's company for years. Mitchell and we just cleaned up his mess. Cleaned up his mess? The detective pushed. Langley swallowed hard. "We buried the proof. A ledger. It has everything. Payments, fake contracts, transactions. It's still there." "Where?" Langley exhaled, defeated. "Under the old office on Main Street. That same day, police dug up the ground behind the abandoned office. And just like Langley said, they found it. The missing ledger. The final piece of the puzzle. The truth." The courtroom was packed, tension thick in the air as the jury filed back in. Every step they took, every rustle of paper, felt like the weight of the world pressing down. Olivia sat beside her mother, her small hands gripping the edge of the bench, her bunny tucked into her lap. She had done everything she could. Now, it was up to 12 strangers to decide her father's fate. The judge turned to the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Pause. Then, the foreman stood. "In the case of the state versus Thomas Wallace, we find the defendant guilty on all charges." Gasps. Whispers. For the first time, Olivia let herself breathe. The judge's gavel came down, but she barely heard it. The noise of the courtroom faded as she turned toward the one person who mattered most. Her father, Daniel Carter. He sat at the defense table, his hands trembling, his eyes wide, like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. And then, the judge spoke again. Due to this conviction, all charges against Daniel Carter are hereby dismissed. The court orders his immediate release. The dam broke. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she shot up from her seat. She didn't care about the crowd, didn't care about the cameras flashing. She ran, straight into her father's arms. Daniel dropped to his knees, holding her tighter than ever before. His breath hitched, his voice barely more than a whisper. My brave girl. You saved me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia felt whole again. The nightmare was over. Daniel Carter was free. The home that once felt empty was now filled with laughter again. Dinners were no longer silent, and Olivia didn't have to sleep clutching her bunny in fear. But something had changed. She had changed. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, Daniel looked at his daughter with pride in his eyes. Olivia, you didn't just save me. You proved that sometimes the truth needs a voice, not just for our family, but for others who don't have someone to fight for them. That's when the idea was born. The Brave Voices Foundation. A place where families facing wrongful convictions could find support. A way to help kids like Olivia speak up, even when the world refused to listen. She had once been just an 8-year-old girl clutching a stuffed bunny, ignored by everyone. Now, she was something more. A fighter, a voice, a reminder that even the smallest whispers can shake the walls of injustice. And her story was just the beginning. Like, subscribe and share if Olivia's courage inspired you. Comment below, what would you do if you were in her shoes?